Marvel comic books always had a great bunch of villains to choose from in the Spider-Man universe. So many great Marvel artists and writers had developed these wonderful characters and written stories and had drawn great images to go along with them, that it was a very easy task to pick those wonderful tales and images that we wanted to make this film based upon.
When we do any movie at Marvel, it always starts with the comic books. It always starts with looking at our favorite stories from the books.
There are more new characters, more villains, more struggle for Peter, maybe the biggest struggle of his life.
In the great tradition of especially Spider-Man villains, there are no villains. There are people who are victim of circumstance. They're fallen.
There's a lot of battles in this movie with many different villains.
Since the end of part one, we were hinting at this conflict coming between Peter and his best friend Harry.
What we saw at the end of Spider-Man 2, we left Harry, and you wonder, is he going to take up his father's mantle?
He lived his whole life for his father, and so when his father was taken from him, the only thing he had in his life was to avenge his father's death. We find him at the beginning of this movie with that single purpose.
We took a little license with Harry. We don't really ever call him the Goblin, but he's using weapons and resources from his father's arsenal.
So now we've got a Goblin glider that's a little bit more sleek, that's a little more agile, but also he's got his father's pumpkin bombs. I mean, there's some weapons that you can't top.
So Harry Osborn has decided to kind of follow in his father's footsteps and creates a new outfit.
Throughout the comics, there have been different versions of the Green Goblin. He's had different looks, there have been different names. So we really took that liberty, and Sam said, let's not have him put on his father's costume. Harry would have something different. Harry would take the technology available to him now and make something else.
They didn't want to go and make a Goblin. They didn't want to do the conventional Goblin. They wanted something new, so essentially they were kind of creating a new suit, a new character.
So this is a kind of Black Knight, a knight that has a sense of armoured cuirass, but with really rather nasty kind of attributes like blades that come out of his arm and a pretty sophisticated and elaborate snowboard.
So this is the new generation glider. It's called the Sky Stick. We made different versions of this board. One that rides on a fluid head gimbal. We made a lighter weight one, and that is for wire flying, so stunts can take that 60 feet in the air.
Well, basically, this is an arm blade mechanism, and this one is functional, spring-loaded, and radio-controlled trigger. And we also are doing a helmet and goggles. There's a static version, solid. There's a stunt version, soft. And then there's one with goggles that lift, and the front of the mask actually travels.
I think the idea behind this suit was he wants to create something that's going to get the job done and just take out Peter Parker.
Harry! You knew this was coming, Pete.
I didn't kill your father!
This movie has a new character, Sandman, Thomas Haden Church. And Sandman is a tragic character who does something bad, but he's not the bad guy.
He's not just an evil sand creature that's out bent on destruction. There are many different layers to him. He has a purpose for what he's doing. At his heart, at his core, is a good man.
So that emotion that he's going through, you see in Thomas Haden Church.
I see it as an honor. Really, these movies stand tall in the pantheon of superhero movies.
I've always loved Sandman. I've been waiting for Sandman to be a villain in one of these movies, and Thomas is fantastic.
Flint has to be scary but also sympathetic.
He's a fairly emotionally isolated loner who has a pretty dark past. He's a guy that spent a number of years in prison, but then he breaks out of prison.
We have some new information. This is your uncle's actual killer. We lost his trail 2 days ago.
His initial ability is just to reform himself into a facsimile state of a human. But what becomes apparent is he has various levels of invulnerability.
This man killed my uncle. He's still out there. So he goes after Flint Marko with a different kind of vengeance in his heart.
Remember Ben Parker? What does it matter to you anyway? Everything!
There's a whole undercurrent that's much more kind of humanely intimate to him.
And you realize throughout the movie he's just a tortured soul. And he's presented with a lot of the obstacles that Peter was back in movie 1. And whereas Peter zigged, he zagged. And you realize that they're really, at their core persona, are not that different.
There is this great internal struggle with a guy like Sandman. And it's the great sort of motif of this guy who's literally continually falling apart. He's like a waterfall of inability to maintain who he is and who he wants to be. But the balance of that is you don't want him to look like he's too fragile and falling apart. You want him to look like he can beat the bejesus out of Spider-Man. So it's a real evolution process. I'll draw this realistic sort of Thomas Haden Church, and then I'll respond to it. I'll tear it apart. I'll sort of destroy it, reform it, destroy it. I could not find a consistency of sand I liked that felt like it would inflict damage and not just, be like a little hourglass. I literally one day went outside and they had dug up this big, deep earth. It was really rocky. It had compact chunks. It was a little wet. That changed all sort of evolution of the look. I guess, in a long story short, I kind of don't know what it's going to look like. I just have an idea of a feeling of it, and then it's this little process, and then once you find it, then you can kind of just run with it and just go crazy.
Well, Jim Atchison was our costume designer for all the villains. With Flint Marko, we really took our cue from the comic book.
Sandman can change shape and dissolve and appear and grow and shrink. That sort of changing character is an interesting idea. In terms of costume, it's very simple, but we're asked in this department to kind of go beyond that. So we design various stages of it, different scales of it, and I work with wonderful sculptors to create maquettes.
The maquettes were used as a basis for, even the movement of the characters and stuff. There was discussions as to which weapons he would have, so we sculpted just a maquette of Thomas Haden Church and then made different versions of weapons that would slide onto that arm.
And then we asked him to, change his physique, and he worked real hard for many months to kind of get bigger.
In the comic book, he was kind of this bulky, muscled guy. We really wanted him to look like a guy that was kind of street-hardened, probably lifted weights in prison. I gained probably about 20 pounds of muscle. We did my entire body casting. First they powder you down, and then you put it in the box, and then they fill it up with plaster.
A head cast is about, the whole process is going to take about an hour and a half, but they're actually under alginate and plaster bandage for about 45 minutes.
We do have to create technology that's never existed before.
And Sandman was a unique opportunity for a CGI. We had to understand how the sand behaved.
Spider-Man literally couldn't grab onto him. Spider-Man throws a web net on him, he goes through the net, he tries to grab him, the sand just runs through Peter's fingers. And finally now, 45 years after his debut in the comics, I think cinema technology has progressed to the point where we can do that on film.
How do we do justice to the most popular Marvel character of all time?
When you make a movie, you can't do exactly with something that looks good in a comic book doesn't necessarily look good on film. Venom is our interpretation of the comic book, and I think the fans will be happy. We had asked Topher Grace to come in and talk about the role, and he was what was written.
I was so honored when I was called to just meet with them, let alone, it was a great day sitting in that office and just have Sam Raimi tell me, I didn't know why he was telling me the whole plot of Spider-Man 3. Going to jump in at some point and tell me why I was there.
He's fun and scary, and he's just another great addition to the ensemble.
Eddie Brock is a great character, and I think Topher Grace is fantastic in the role. It's competition for Peter. It's challenging him. It's challenging his kind of place at the Bugle.
It's Brock, sir. Edward Brock Jr.
What we always try to do with the Spider-Man movies is make the villains personal to Peter.
Whoa, Spidey, love the new outfit! But there are also a lot of differences. On the outside, Eddie is probably a slicker individual, but that is just an exterior, and his interior is very weak.
Parker.
It's a very slow transformation. It's really weaved in with the rest of the story.
Venom basically has similar strengths as Spider-Man, but just stronger, more agile, more vicious.
It's a little bit, anything you can do, I can do better.
The person I really want to please is me, because I read these comic books, and it's daunting because Venom is a fan favorite, and so when I approach the script, it's I always think with great power comes great fun. The challenge in translating comic book to a movie is how do you take these spectacular 2D images, how do you then turn that into the three-dimensional world? The famous black suited Spidey begins as a little bit of black goo in the comics. In the final version of Spider-Man 3, you're going to see something that's much more alive, that has many more tentacles and pieces to it, and a lot of that came from our illustrator EJ, who just took that initial concept of the goo and said, okay, how can we push this further?
I mean, the goo was kind of a major thing, you know, and that's a perfect example of how in comics the goo works, but in the real world, you got to feel that it's different. And it's a little more vicious. I just got this image in my mind of, you know, these things just, you know, literally pulling his eyes open and being kind of vicious. Those drawings really sparked a resonance in Sam. It then led to the idea, okay, well, how is this guy constructed? Traditionally, Venom doesn't have a web on his costume. My specialty is to really ground a design or an illustration in something that could work in the real world. You have seams, you have things that need to be covered, and the webbing just kind of came out, and then it became this whole thing. What if the webbing was very vicious? What if it looked like it was gripping him? What if he really felt the pain of this thing on him?
Look, I'm a really skinny guy, so I put on about 15, 20 pounds for the role. I started working out about 6 or 7 months before we started shooting.
And this character is a very elusive and difficult one to nail down.
The whole process, to get into, if I'm doing the makeup for Venom, it's about an hour to get into just the suit.
He would first sit in the makeup chair and put on the appliance pieces onto his face, so it was a 4-hour process.
And then when we were doing the motion capture, you know, that took a good 2 hours to put 1,000 dots on my face. It's kind of a tough portal to go through, but once you're on the other side, you can really have a lot of fun. So you always want to pick a villain that can put Peter Parker on this shaky moral ground. It's not that he's stronger, it's not that he's faster. He said he ultimately comes to a moral decision.
We ask ourselves the question, what does this young man still have to learn to overcome these obstacles and truly become a hero?
We have a lot of villains in the movie, but thematically, everybody in the movie is fighting their dark side.
Spider-Man generally is the weaker of the two fighters, and he would have to find the villain's vulnerabilities.
So although you have an existing set of storylines, we really need to shake it up to give the audience a new experience.
This could be the end of Spider-Man.